New York Times claimed in their endorsement of Elizabeth Warren that she was a more electable candidate from the progressive wing compared to Bernie Sanders. But Jacobin contributing editor Matt Karp is calling out that claim.
In a new piece, he says that Bernie has already won back the so-called Obama-Trump voters, and Warren's electability track record is much more concerning. Joining us now via Skype to explain more is Matt himself. Great to see you, sir.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you guys.
Very good. All right, so make the argument that you make in this piece, because you really dig into the data of how Bernie performed in Vermont versus how Warren performs in Massachusetts.
Yeah, let's talk Bernie first. I think, in a funny way, one of the things that's been least discussed in since Bernie emerged as a national figure in 2016 is how impressive his 30 years of sort of electoral performance in Vermont has been. He's run consistently ahead, not just of, Republicans, and Vermont it's hard to remember now, but it was a Republican state. His seat had been held by a Republican for about 150 years before he took over in the Senate in 2006. Republicans, Reagan won Vermont, George H.W. Bush won Vermont. Bernie emerged in this kind of context of a swing state. And for 30 years, he has outrun not just Republicans, but mainstream Democrats, gubernatorial candidates, Senate, his fellow Senator Pat Leahy, and especially Democratic presidents, Hillary Clinton most recently, but going all the way back to Bill Clinton, Al Gore, John Kerry, Obama, everyone in between. And Bernie's strength, what's really distinctive about this is that it's not that he's just running up the score in Burlington among the college kids. He's performs especially strong in the most rural, most conservative, and the lowest income parts of Vermont, especially in the Northeast, right. Where he ran 14 points ahead of Hillary Clinton. And compared to Donald Trump in 2018, Trump won, I think, 61 towns in Vermont. Bernie won back 47 of those. Now, he is a longtime incumbent. There are reasons to sort of contextualize that level of performance. No one would suggest that Bernie would, defeat Trump, by 67% nationally. But this is an incredibly strong level of performance, especially against, in comparison to his other contender in the progressive lane, Elizabeth Warren.
Mm-hmm. So, Matt, the only thing I would push on is that it seems to me that the way that Bernie was able to be ascendant in Vermont is he kind of declared peace on cultural conservatives within the state. He took quite a lot of heat in 2016, for example, for his position on guns. Now, I'm not saying he wasn't personally socially liberal, but the very core of his message was economic. That doesn't seem to me to be the case in this particular election. How do you think that's going to play out going forward?
That's an interesting question. I think Bernie walked a tightrope in Vermont in a lot of ways. It wasn't the case that he moved his principles, I don't believe, in a fundamental way. I think he had a lifetime D something rating from the NRA. He never became a pro-gun conservative on even the gun control issue. But it is true, I agree. And I actually think this could be an asset to him in the general election, that he didn't make that the center of his, sort of political message or his political brand, if you will, if we have to speak in that degraded language. He centered economic issues, and I think that's what he would, and he did that successfully. And I think that that's what he would do in a 2020 battle against Trump. I know, Sagar, you said the other day that a Bernie Trump election would really come down to culture war. I think that's what Trump would try to do. Mm-hmm. But if that happens, I don't think that's good for Bernie. And I think Bernie has one thing he's shown over 30 years is that he successfully can reroute the conversation from culture war to bread and butter. Who is going to provide jobs? Who is going to provide healthcare? Who is going to provide material necessities to constituents? And Bernie has had a better argument on that front than any of the Democrats running in Vermont or the Republicans. And I think he'd have a better argument than Trump, too.
Yeah, there's a danger in Trump also trying to do just the culture war case, because there's a danger that you then look out of touch with those bread and butter issues that we know most voters end up basing their votes on, especially swing voters. And there is some indication that outside of Vermont, Sanders has a similar appeal in more rural, more conservative areas. I was pointing out in this latest Iowa poll, they broke down support for the candidates in the Democratic primary by congressional district. And the place where Sanders actually has his strongest performance is the district that is currently represented by Steve King, a district I know really well. It's one of the most rural, rural, farm-heavy districts in the entire country, and that is where Sanders disproportionately outperformed in Iowa in the Democratic primary.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, again, it's risky to sort of put too much weight on small, low-population counties in Vermont. But the truth is, Vermont is a rural state, and a lot of these places in the Northeast, they call it the Northeast Kingdom, but it's not just the Northeast Kingdom. Also, places like Rutland County, traditionally conservative-leaning parts of the state. Socially, economically, in terms of the sort of economic deprivation they've suffered and some of the social harm and dislocation they've suffered in terms of opioid addiction, the so-called deaths of despair and drug overdoses. A lot of these places in Vermont bear resemblance to rural areas in Iowa, for instance, or in key swing states, Michigan and Wisconsin, even parts of northern Ohio and Pennsylvania, I think are economically, socially, culturally similar. And yeah, it's very striking that Bernie has been able to get the message there. And it's not just that Trump voters didn't turn out against Bernie. He actually won more raw votes than Hillary Clinton won in those places. So the Democrats can win in 2020. There's only two ways to do it: bring in new voters, and we talk a lot about Bernie's strategy and bringing in new voters, but winning over some people who voted for Trump, and including especially people in places like that, in working class areas, in rural areas. And it's a great sign that he's shown strength there.
Right, and so one thing you guys will certainly be up against is the elite liberalism in the way that they view a lot of these issues. You see this in the Des Moines Register and in the New York Times endorsements of Elizabeth Warren, in which they really kind of misunderstand the cultural liberalism that she has made almost as the ethos of her campaign, contra to economic issues. How do you see that dynamic, kind of playing out? As Sanders becomes more ascendant, you're already seeing it with things like the Joe Rogan endorsement. I covered that today. I mean, how is that kind of internecine war within the left movement going to play itself out in the context of a Sanders at the helm of it?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's too soon to pivot to that, I think, because, we haven't had a vote in Iowa yet. Bernie hasn't won any states.
Right.
And I think the Sanders campaign is is correctly focusing still on the Democratic primary. We need to not get ahead of ourselves. But looking far forward, and because the truth is, any Democratic primary that Sanders wins, in my view, won't be a cakewalk. There's no way that he sweeps early and the establishment folds and just accepts him. It can only happen in a parallel way that Donald Trump won, in which all sorts of attempted combinations and hijinks are pulled off by the establishment in order to sort of suppress Bernie. And he has to fight that fight all the way to June. But I do think, this is a case that Megan Day and I made in a piece that we wrote earlier, that in a general election, if Bernie does have that establishment, if Bernie is the nominee, the great thing, and Crystal's talked about this too, they have to fall in line for him. They have no other choice, much like the Republicans did in 2020. There's there's really no third option. Mike Bloomberg has already put all his chips on the table. He's going to support the Democratic nominee no matter what with his money. He said that. And I don't think he's going to squirm out of that. He won't have a choice. And in that case, Bernie will not only be the captain of the ship, sort of basically coercing the support of these people, he'll also be able to set the terms of the campaign, which in my view will be a campaign based on bread and butter, based on contrasting the billionaire Donald Trump, who spent his life screwing the working man and the working woman, and Bernie Sanders, who spent his whole life fighting for those same people.
It's amazing how many New Yorkers we have at the height of our politics right now, this sort of New York cultural bash playing out on a grand national stage.
Yeah.
Really interesting stuff, Matt. Great to see you. Thank you so much.
Matt.
Thank you, guys.
See you, man. Next on Rising, Dr. Kevin Sabet. He discusses his concerns about the push to legalize marijuana. I think you'll all know I'll enjoy that one.